Proletarians of all countries, unite.
We be of one blood, ye and I.
Right, don't ever forget those words, Mowgli.
This video has been specially translated into English for our comrades who understand that we all live on the big spaceship called Earth, and we are all equal as passengers of this ship. Therefore, the decision was made to strike at modern capitalists and their corporations from the past, based on Victor Kovda's book about the plan for the transformation of nature. I am voicing the data presented by various Soviet American and English scientists from the chapter on the powerlessness of capitalism in mastering the elements of nature. Enjoy viewing. I want to start with this information on site ferra.ro. The soil in the United States is being destroyed up to 1,000 times faster than it formed. What does this mean? It's not just the United States that will suffer. Researchers at the University of Massachusetts recently announced that soil erosion rates in the US Midwest are 10 to 1,000 times higher than pre-agriculture rates, a discovery that has implications for everything from global food security. This is the modern information. Now we start with the book in 1915. Powerless capitalism in possession of the elements of nature. The capitalist world with classical contradiction tearing it apart. Destructive wars, crises, and anarchy of production could not pose and solve the problem of planned ownership of spontaneous natural resources. Numerous ancient irrigation structures created by the centuries-old labor of peoples of Central Asia, India, China, and South America did not collapse as a result of bloody wars. The densely populated oases of Libyan Desert, the Sahara, and other territories of North Africa in the past, which produced a lot of food and country fell into desolation after they were captured by British, French, Belgian, and other imperialists. The causes of the wars previously unirrigated and populated territories, ancient cities, and the oases are rooted not in the natural historical processes of the drying Asia and not in the advance of the sands of the Sahara, but in the very nature of the capitalist path of production. The stable economy of capitalist and colonial countries is characterized by chronic lack and depression caused by the flow of capital into industry in pursuit of declining profits. The state of decline in the development of capitalist agriculture makes it impossible for justified and constant application of modern achievements of science and technology. Private ownership of land, the dependence of the composition of agricultural crops and the areas under them on market condition and periodic crises lead to the predatory use of land. The soil is cultivated without proper rotation, without accounting its views of the landscape at the whim of the individual owner, without any consequences that would change as a result of such use. The lack of proper crop rotation destroys agronomically valuable soil, adversely affects its physical and chemical properties, and contributes to the development of erosion and soil blowing. The antithesis between city and countryside leads to the systemic depletion and the robbery of the territory through the irreversible alienation of huge masses of mineral substance and substance obtained from fields in industrial centers, which disrupts the normal metabolism in nature. The inability to implement rational agricultural practices and preventive measures that maintain high soil fertility leads to the destruction of fertile soils over vast territories. Karl Marx proved that capitalist agriculture is incompatible with science and perfect methods of using the soil. The moral of the story, which can also be learned by looking at agriculture from a different point of view, is that the capitalist system is contrary to rational agriculture, or that rational agriculture is incompatible with the capitalist system. American propaganda spreads false information that large-scale capitalist agriculture in the United States makes it possible to protect and develop fertile soils. This is not true. Back in 1867, Karl Marx in Capital pointed out the impossibility of rational use of soil under capitalism. Every progress of capitalism agriculture is not only progress in the art of robbing the worker, but also in the art of robbing the soil. Every progress in improving its fertility for a given period is at the same time progress in the destruction of permanent sources of this fertility. The more well-known a country, such as the United States, relies on large-scale industry as a hidden basis of its development, the faster this process of destruction. Capitalist production therefore develops the technique and the combination of social process of production only in such a way that it undermines at the same time the sources of all wealth, the land and the worker. In the area of imperialism, the plunder of natural resources intensified even more. The capitalist system of the period of imperialism, with the characteristic technical stagnation of agriculture and its constant depressions, is not able to ensure the progressive development of agriculture. Moreover, the entire system of agriculture oriented toward the market, profit, and economically unstable conditions leads to the fact that rational methods of farming in capitalist countries are generally impossible. The English scientist D. Russell, in his book Soil Conditions and Plants Growth, wrote, "The accumulation of population in cities and the huge reduction in the cost of transportation led in the 19th century to the introduction in the new countries, especially in North America, of perhaps the most unprofitable of all known methods of farming, constant cultivation of land without periodic replacement of legumes and grass crops. Organic matter began to rapidly mineralize, leaching and erosion greatly increased after the removal of vegetation cover, while the constituent soil practically slowly formed over centuries, soon disintegrated. Nothing was returned to the soil, grain and other market products were sold, and the straw was burned. The result was a degree of exhaustion unparalleled in the old countries, and finding a means to help himself was beyond the strength of the farmer, which is why he left the land and went away. In modern conditions, the process of theft of natural resources and above all soil fertility has increased even more in the United States. Erosion and black storms have reached a catastrophic proportion in the United States. Erosion is destroying soils on more than 100 million acres in the United States. The American specialist in the field of soil erosion, Bennett, unwittingly shows that the consequences of capitalist agriculture in the United States will take several generations to correct. The predatory use of soils in the US agriculture leads, in addition to erosion, to widespread progressive soil depletion. This can be judged from the data in Ian's book, Factors of Soil Formation, published in 1941. The author notes that in the average condition of grain farming in the United States under the exciting farming system, he also considers it predatory exploitative. For over the past 60 years, profoundly negative changes have occurred in soils. The humus content decreased by 38% compared to the original, and the nitrogen content decreased by 42%. Absorption capacity and aggregation decreased by 25 and 30% respectively. Acidity increased by 25%, and the content of the clay fraction increased by 40%. This process was accompanied by a significant decrease in soil fertility and plant productivity. This is convincingly confirmed by figures showing a decrease in wheat yields in the United States. During the period from 1913 to 1937, wheat yields decreased by 33%. Progressive American literature paints a terrible picture of the impoverishment of US farming due to the ruin of large capitalists, as well as due to the loss of land fertility caused by predatory management. Kieran McWilliams, in his book The Distressed Land, 1949, indicates the reason for this destruction of the soil. Local pastures were plowed up and sown with wheat. Farmers did not fertilize the soil at all and did not even dig wells. After one or two good wheat harvests, the land was already depleted. For a number of years they cultivated the land, each year hoping to reap a good harvest, until finally the surface layer of the earth turned into a fine powder. Rochester, in his book Why Farmers Are Poor, 1949, tells how excessive overloading of pastures leads to the death of grass, shrubs, and destruction of soil cover. The grasslands of the Great Plains grazed nearly twice as many cattle as, which they could feed without destructive consequences for the soil cover. The plains turned into the desert, overwhelmed by dust storms. The average farmers cannot combat soil depletion. Approximately 500,000 farmers in the United States are unable to provide food even for their own families due to the loss of soil fertility on their farms. Droughts and crop shortages recur on average once every 3 years. The reasons for the loss of soil fertility and the ruin of farming in the United States are, according to Rochester, the lack of proper crop rotation, excessive exploitation of arable land, excessive grazing, lack of proper fertilized system, loss of organic matter in the soil, washing away of soil with water and blowing it away during storms, etc. Poor farmers who sought to earn a living, writes Rochester, could not leave one half or one third of their land uncultivated annually, as required by correct crop rotation. To date, the soil cover has been destroyed over vast areas from Montana and Dakotas to Texas. The same situation is found in the states of Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico, and Oklahoma, where the soil cover has been demolished and farm buildings and gardens are covered with sand and dust. Hundreds of thousands of farmers are ruined and left alone with their families without work and shelter. In the United States, 2 million people, the so-called agriculture migrants, are nomadic, trying to find work and somehow return to agriculture. The movement of hundreds of thousands of homeless farmers, along with their wives, children, and elderly people along the US roads, resembles a terrible nightmare, writes McWilliams. The US government is trying to resolve the agriculture issue by reducing the area under cultivation and reducing the production of wheat, cotton, corn, rice, and tobacco by farmers. For reducing production, farmers are promised a bonus. Hundreds of thousands of tons of finished products are destroyed. And all this is happening at a time when millions of people are in need of food. For nowadays, 30% in the world need of food. In the United States, over 35% of the population is undernourished, and in some years 80%. From 1940 to 1945, the total number of farms in the United States decreased by 215,000, and the number of large farms producing primarily for the market increased by only 6.8%. 8,000. The area under agriculture crops in the United States decreased in 1950 compared to 1949, grain by 90.5%, cotton by 31.3%, etc. For nowadays, in 21st century, hunger in the United States is conditionally defeated by GMO products and other cheap, low-grade disposable goods and junk food, which provides a lot of chronic disease like diabetes, insulin resistance, chronic asthmatic, and etc. The noted phenomena are also typically for irrigated agriculture in the United States. The main burden of irrigation and reclamation construction costs in the United States falls on the shoulders of farmers. Capitalist firms, guided primarily by the interest of profit, build an irrigation system and structures on them extremely poorly. The construction of number of irrigation systems was not completed due to lack of funds. Farmers who settled on these lands in the hope of irrigation were forced to move to the other places. Built in 1900 till 1904 in the south of the United States, the All-American Canal for irrigation served an area of 27,000 hectares. The canal was heavily filled with silt. In 1905, during a flood on the Colorado River, the canal was completely destroyed and the river waters flooded an area of up to 11,700 hectares for several years. Thousands of farms were destroyed and ruined. Irrigated agriculture in the United States is characterized by extremely slow development of lands covered by irrigation structures. According to American statistics, it is known that 10 till 20 years after completion of construction of new irrigation system, only 40 till 50% of the land is developed. Periodic sales crises do not provide the farmer with the material opportunities to carry out radical land reclamation and complete sustainable development. The scourge of irrigated agriculture in the United States is secondary salinization of irrigated soils. In the 40s, the area of secondary saline irrigated soils in the United States reached 20 million acres. 11 western states were especially affected, including the irrigated areas of California, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado. Many hundreds of farms went bankrupt. This is explained the fact that large capitalist enterprises pursue primarily the interest of profit, and the average farmer himself cannot cope with the secondary salt marsh processes caused by an unplanned and incorrect irrigation system. Capitalist firms are doing their best to hinder the development of the new hydraulic engineering construction in the United States. Those railway companies are hindering measures that improve the development of water transport, and owners of thermal power plants are hindering the construction of hydroelectric power stations. It is well known that the 1,000 richest Americans, led by Morgan, for a number of years thwarted attempts to begin the construction of hydraulic structures on the river St. Lawrence. The predatory nature of capitalist agriculture combined with slave labor is especially evident in colonial countries. Imperialism, shaken by inevitable wars and crises, led to the disappearance of ancient oases of irrigation, the destruction of soils from salinization, and the depopulation of previously densely populated territories. Soils with their fertility formed over thousands of years are destroyed by the capitalist method of farming within decades. Karl Marx wrote, "The result is that culture, if it develops spontaneously and is not consciously directed, leaves behind a desert." The appearance of imperialists in the countries of South America, Africa, or Asia was always accompanied by the seizure of the best of development lands, which became the property of the invaders. The massive impoverishment of the indigenous population of Peru, Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, Sudan, India, Java, the Philippines, and other countries who lost their land was accompanied partly by extinction and partly by the transformation of the survivors into slaves. For the colonialists, irrigation serves as means of brutal exploitation for profit. Thus, the British take 40% of the harvest from the Sudan's population for the use of water. Vast areas of Indian land are not being cultivated due to the destruction of irrigation and reclamation structures, while millions of peasants and workers are starving. The British colonialists explain the growing poverty and decline of the Indian economy with the Malthusians' false theory of overpopulation and anti-scientific statement about low soil fertility. The famous figure of Communist Party of England, Palm Dot, in his book India Today, reports horrifying facts of poverty and exploitation of the indigenous populations by the British colonialists. India ranks second in the world in terms of water energy reserves, 27 million horsepower. But only 3% of water resources are used in the country's national economy. The ancient irrigation structures of India are neglected or destroyed. The fertility of the lands of previously flourishing oases is falling due to a lack of water, salinization, and waterlogging. Up to 70% of cultivable land is empty, and the actual sown area is only about 53% of arable land. Food crop yields are continuously falling. Over the past 15 till 20 years, wheat yields have fallen from 9 to 8 quintals hectare, and rice yields from 17 to 11 quintals hectare. In the mid-30s, the area of cultivated land decreased by another 2.5 million hectares. By 1940, the area under food crops had decreased by 600,000 hectares. Every year in India, about 600,000 people died due to famine. Hunger, high mortality, and boundless poverty have become a constant phenomenon, the everyday life of India. For 50 years of second half of the 19th century, famine in India was repeated, according to Palm Dot, 24 times. And the number of people who died during this period due to famine, according to official statistics, is more than 20 million people. Words of Karl Marx about destruction of ancient irrigation system by the imperialists sound quite modern. In Asia, from time immemorial, there have been three branches of management: the financial department, or department for robbing one's own people, the military department, or the department for robbing neighboring peoples, and finally the department of public works. And so British took over from their predecessors the Department of Finance and the Department of War, but they completely neglected the Department of Public Works. Work on land, reclamation, development, the maintenance of the technical condition of irrigation structures. The invasion of US imperialists and the artificial division of India have further worsened the economic situation of modern India. The peoples of Egypt are experiencing a similar tragedy. Construction in the middle of 19th century, the Suez Canal was the beginning of the complete economic enslavement of Egypt and its transformation first into a colony of France, then of England. Due to various financial speculations, the Egyptian economy by the end of the 19th century was so confused and destroyed that Egypt found itself in a complete economic and political dependence of English capital. The degradation of Egypt's irrigated agriculture as a result of the management of the British colonialists can be judged by the figure of the continuous decrease in the cotton yield. At the end of the last century, the harvest of purified cotton reached 6.3 centenars hectare, and in the 40s the yield dropped to the 4.8 centenars hectare. And although in 1939 till 1940 cotton yields have increased slightly, in general this level of yield cannot be compared with the level of cotton yield on the irrigated lands of the Soviet Central Asian and Transcaucasian republics. The main reason for the low and progressively falling cotton yields on the irrigated lands of Egypt is the continuous increase in the salinity and irrigated soils, the inaccessibility of expensive mineral fertilizers for phylactered peasants, and the inability to carry out drainage work, the main means of eliminating salinization of irrigated soils in the vicinity of saline groundwater. Data from Egyptian Ministry of Agriculture also indicate not only a drop in cotton yields but also a continuous deterioration in the quality of cotton fiber, as can be seen from the following figure. Egypt's irrigation is completely in the hands of foreign capitalists and serves as means of enslavement and brutal exploitation of the fellahs. The best lands of Egypt are concentrated in the hands of foreigners. Thus, in the 30s, more than half of all irrigated land was concentrated in the hands of a few foreign companies, and the remaining area was distributed among millions of fellahs. For the use of pumps, the supply water, the landowner charged the fellah 5 till 10 times more than it actually costs. Having carried out reclamation and drainage work on their lands, foreign owners rent out these plots to the fellahim at incredibly high prices, buying agricultural products, primarily cotton, for next to nothing. The management of the British in Egypt and India led to the fact that on irrigated land secondary soil salinization covered an area of up to 3 million hectares. This is what Ahmed Saad Kamel, the envoy of the Egyptian people to the Second Peace Congress in Warsaw in 1950, said. For 70 years, Egypt has been under imperialist rule. This is 70 years of disasters, ignorance and disease. 70 years of exploitations, oppression, terror. But these 70 years were also a period of constant struggle for our freedom and independence. The imperialists turned our country into a huge agriculture base for supply the large Lancashire Trust with cheap cotton. As a result, our country has become a classic example of lowest standard of living and staggering poverty. Frequent and various diseases are rampant in the country. Egypt has the highest infant mortality rate in the world, and the average human life expectancy is one of the shortest in the world. Russia has the highest infant mortality rate in the world. Ukraine now has the highest infant mortality in the world, and the average human life expectancy is one of the shortest in the world. Thank you, BlackRock and other transnational corps. Apologies, I got carried away. In South Africa, the Anglo-Dutch colonialists, having taken away fertile lands from the indigenous population, blacks, Bantu, and etc., pushed them into barren reserve territories or turned them into their slaves, tenants, sharecroppers. In Fitzgerald's book, Africa, it is said that 3/4 of the total population of the Union of South Africa have only 0.1 land area. The rest of the land is concentrate in the hands of a small group of colonialists. The landless and disenfranchised black and colored population of South Africa is dying out, living in hunger and poverty. The impoverished portion of the landless poor whites constituting 0.1 of the white population is deteriorating physically and mentally. The European population is living vast areas of rural areas of the Union of South Africa. Previously development hands are becoming victims of erosion, are increasingly subject to drought and are losing fertility. The powerlessness of the capitalist system in the fight against the elements of nature and the degradation of agriculture can be seen in example of Latin American countries, in particular Brazil. The indigenous Indian population of Brazil was plundered by the Portuguese conquerors. For more than 400 years, the process of predatory use of Brazil's natural resources has been going on first by Portuguese, then by the British, and especially American capitalists. During the 18th century, there was a decline in sugarcane culture. Hundreds of thousands of people went bankrupt and left the sugar areas. In the 19th century and 20th century, the Brazilian economy was characterized by successive booms: cotton, coffee, rice boom. However, just as consistently under the influence of competition in the world market, droughts and a decline in soil fertility, there was a decline in the culture of coffee, cotton growing and rice growing. The collapse of rice cultivation occurred already in the 20th of our century. Droughts, floods, and soil infertility caused by the predatory use of forests, waters, and fields led to mass destruction, impoverishment of people, and their flight to other places. The government's attempt to develop irrigation, as James reports in his book Latin America, was not crowned with significant success. Washed away soils of coffee plantations, wetlands of rice crops, cottonlands that have lost fertility, abandoned turned into deserts, or at best into pastures. G. de Castro, in his book The Geography of Hunger, provides data that 2/3 of the population of Latin America is systematically hungry, broke, or on the verge of ruin. This is the shameful result of the cultural activities of the American and English transformers of nature. Nowhere in the capitalist world are ruling classes fighting the disaster elements. The imperialists spend huge sums of preparing and waging aggressive wars, but spend negligible funds on the construction of irrigation system. A significant part of South Africa is occupied by the Kalahari Desert Steppe. In 30s, engineer Swartz developed a project for using the waters of the Kipin and Tshobo rivers to water the desert by forming a special reservoir. Swartz's project did not find any support or source of funding. Another project proposed the formation of a large reserve in northern Africa, which was supposed to create a humid subtropical climate in the Sahara. There was also a proposal to use groundwater for irrigation of Sahara. The projects that did not receive any support were not developed. The British built the Aswan Dam on the Nile River only for irrigation, as they did not want to provide electricity to Egypt. As a result, the dam was built twice. One of the most striking examples of powerlessness of capitalism in transforming nature is the boom raised in the 1946-1949 by the British government around the plan to breed groundnuts on giant plantations in Africa. It was advertised that plantations were being established on an area of 3.25 million acres. England was supposed to cover half of its fat needs with this plan in 1950. In 1946, only 26,000 acres were under plantations, and groundnut harvest did not even cover the seed. The plan to transform Africa has failed. All hitherto exciting methods of production, wrote Friedrich Engels in his classic work Dialectics of Nature, had in mind only the achievement of the most immediate beneficial effects of labor. Further consequences appearing only later and having an effect due to gradual repetition and accumulation were not taken into account at all. Therefore, wrote Friedrich Engels, it was indifferent to the Spanish planters in Cuba that the burning of forests on the mountain slopes, which made it possible for only one generation to use coffee plantations, led to disastrous erosion and their complete destruction of the soil cover, since with the capitalist mode of production profit is primarily meant, and only from this point of view is the immediate effect of economic activity on earth taken into account. It is not surprising that the long-term consequences of the action directed in this direction turn out to be of a completely different nature, mostly the opposite. Friedrich Engels said that pre-socialistic society, due to its predatory nature, cannot conscientiously direct natural processes and the consequences of its economic activities, that end results of which are often destructive. In the 20th century, the destructive consequences of predatory management under the capitalist mode of production became especially obvious. The ideologists of Anglo-American imperialism are trying to prove that the capitalist system is not to blame for misfortunes experienced by the masses. To justify the thoroughly rotten capitalist system, the monstrous exploitation of the working people, wars of conquest for profit, to justify the powerlessness of capitalism in mastering the elements of nature, old reactionary theories are brought to light. 150 years ago, the English nobleman and priest Malthus sought to deceive workers by explaining unemployment, illness, poverty, and mortality among workers allegedly. Their excessively rapid reproduction and irresistible laws of nature. Malthus slandered, claiming that the world's population is growing faster than agricultural productivity and therefore people must inevitably lack of food. Malthus recommended depriving workers of their rights to marriage and family. Something similar we now heard from Schwab or something like that. Depriving them of medical care and increasing mortality. Assessing the class essence of Malthusianism, Karl Marx wrote about Malthus that he is not a man of science, but a hired lawyer, a shameless sycophant of the ruling classes. Karl Marx accused Malthus of deliberately deceiving the English worker class to please the ruling classes. The words of Karl Marx should now be fully attributed to one of the most thorough Malthusians, the American William Vogt, who published a book in 1948 called The Path to Salvation. Vogt's book is a typical example of the corruption and degradation of science in capitalist countries, its extreme fascism, an example of obscurantism and misanthropy, of the pseudo-scientific lakeys of capitalism serving Wall Street and its imperialist program. Vogt went incomparably further than Malthus. He openly declares that the only way to save American imperialism from crisis and revolution is the mass destruction of people through disease, famine, and war. Vogt calls for the destruction of the population of India, China, Italy, Latin America, and regrets that the population of Europe, despite the Second World War, increased by 11 million people over a decade. He sees favorable prospects in the fate of France, Chile, Tanganyika, where population growth is slow and high mortality is a great advantage. Vogt strongly wishes for a repetition of the devastating famines in China, and enemy of his own people. He demands to reduce the US population from 140 million to 100 million. The main thing in this misanthropic program is not only to preserve backwardness, sexual injustice, poverty and high mortality in non-American countries, but also to reduce in every possible way the living condition of the population of these countries. Otherwise, Vogt fears the growing population of India, China and Africa will begin to develop their industry and become a threat to the whole world. By the whole world, Vogt of course means the American British colonialists. For the countries of Europe and Latin America, Vogt puts forward the same program, offering to provide assistance to other countries only if they have state plans for stabilizing the population. This is a direct attempt by the Pandin to use food and technical resources of the United States to enslave the peoples of the world, to turn them into obtained slaves working for scraps. The American magazine Saturday Evening Post wrote that William Vogt's book should be considered the forerunner of President Truman's bold new program to help the backward peoples of the world. Soviet people understand what is hidden behind this help. But Vogt is flattered that the program he developed to reduce the living standards of colonial countries has now become a program of American government. Till 21st centuries. He demands that countries blessed with the US care should not allow the most primitive health measures, insisting on the need to increase mortality in these countries in order to break their resistance, fraudulently using the scientific categories of soil science. Vogt is trying to prove that the fertility of soils under agrobiology cultivation is progressively and inevitably falling, that science and technology are not able to ensure the success of the fight against these processes, to overcome negative phenomena in soils that are caused by human economic activity and, according to Vogt, inevitably lead to the death of civilization. According to Vogt, the absolute amount of arable land on the globe is very small and fluctuates within 1040 till 1600 million, within 1400 till 1600 million hectares, and the development of the world's land resources is almost substantially completed. Vogt evidence shows that the amount of arable land on the globe is continuously decreasing due to soil erosion and other unfavorable phenomena caused by agriculture, and the continuous growth of population leads to the fact that in a number of countries the area of arable land is 0.08 0.02 hectares per person, and these countries cannot feed themselves. The countries of Europe, Vogt argues, live only on imports from the American continent, whose lands are perishing, being washed into the Gulf of Mexico. Vogt's statement about the completion of the process of development terrestrial lands for agriculture is a shameless lie, designed for an ignorant reader. The results of many years of researching by the Soviet scientist, academic Prasalov and his students on the issues of world reserves of land resources and the degree of their development show that humanity has numerous reserves for the development of agriculture and the production of food and agricultural raw materials. Thus, the areas of sown land together with orchard and vineyards are in percent of the area of the states. Please look on the screen. Even such types of soils as Chernozems and Chernozems-like soils of the prairies, which are the main basis for grain farming, have been developed on no more than 30–35% of their area. Enormous reserves of undeveloped soils exist within all soil types, in particular among the soils of valleys, deciduous and coniferous forests, and especially among the soils of steppes, deserts and tropics. The soils of mountainous countries and tundras are almost completely undeveloped. The chains of capitalist property hinder the development of agriculture and the progressive development of new lands. But the experience of socialist agriculture of the Soviet Union in economic model of dictatorship of proletariat shows that the successful development of the lands of the North semi-deserts and mountainous regions puts at disposal of mankind new tens and hundreds of thousands of hectares of fertile soils, producing grain, flax, cotton, vegetables, fruits, and wood. And in the future, humanity will have the opportunity to use the world ocean and inland water bodies for these purposes, the fertility of which has not yet been used much in the economy. The ocean and seas can produce valuable food, algae, as well as large quantities of fish. According to Prasalov, the percentage of agriculture use of soils approximately calculated from the World Soil Map, the map of world agriculture on their and other materials is currently. Thus Vogt's statement about reached limit of development of the soils of the Earth's land is a falsification of science, a caricature of scientific forecast, and a purely disgusting rehash of Hitler fascist propaganda about the lack of living space. This time in relation to the goals of Anglo-Saxon contenders for world domination. Vogt's other thesis about the biological limit of any territory is just a false and pseudoscientific. The fertility of existing arable soils, Vogt argues, is limited by the biological limit, which Vogt tries to explain by the concept of territorial capacity, which he defines as the ratio of biological potential, fertility, to environmental resistance, needs and population. Upon closer examination, the concepts of biological limit and territory capacity are nothing more than a slightly transformed and made up agriculture use of land. In general, modern scientific terminology is the false law of diminishing soil fertility. This false law, which originates from West Malthus, Ricardo and Tunen, was exposed by Karl Marx in Capital when considering issues of land rent. In his work, Essays on the Critique of Political Economy, Friedrich Engels wrote in 1844, "The productive forces and the disposal of mankind are immeasurable. The productivity of the land can be infinitely increased by the application of capital, labor and knowledge. In particular, only the methods of soil reclamation known in the middle of the last century were able to increase the productivity of the latter, as Engels points out, by 6 or more times. Karl Marx, in a letter to Friedrich Engels dated January 7, 1851, wrote that the development of society is accompanied by a general increase in fertility of the land, and the more general the improvement of the land, the greater the number of varieties of the land it covers. However, irreconcilable contradictions inherent in the nature of the capitalist mode of production lead to the fact that the development of agriculture under capitalism undermines and plunders the fertility of the land, since rational agriculture is incompatible with the capitalist economic system, meaning agriculture based on the achievements of science and technology and freed from the chains of private ownership of land and means of production. Agriculture of Socialism and Communism. Karl Marx wrote, the land constantly improving if it treated correctly. Lenin led an irreconcilable struggle against the reactionary false law of diminishing soil fertility, raised to the shield by Bulgakov, David and Maslow. Lenin completed the exposure of the false law of falling productivity of subsequent costs and showed its anti-science, reactionary nature and direct connection with the class interests of the bourgeois and landholders. Bulgakov, David and Maslow. Lenin proved that only apologetes of the bourgeois system and stupidity are the content of the false law of declining soil fertility. Lenin showed that the progressive development of science and technology, the use of new types of fertilizers, processing methods, and the development of livestock raising create prospects for the endless development of labor productivity in agriculture. But this unlimited increase in agriculture productivity is possible only under the condition of its complete revolutionary liberation from the remnants of feudalism and private ownership of land, which hinder the development and predetermine the backwardness of capitalist agriculture. The introduction of machines and improved methods of production immeasurably made this struggle for man in general easier, wrote Lenin, referring to the struggle with nature and food production in particular. It was not the difficulty of producing food that increased, but the difficulty of obtaining food for the worker. It increased because capitalist development inflated land rent and land price, concentrated agriculture in the hands of large and small capitalists, concentrate even more machines, tools, money, without which successful production is impossible. To explain this growing difficulty of workers' existence by saying that nature is reducing its gifts is to become a bourgeois apologist. The words spoken by Lenin to Bulgakov can be fully attributed to Vogt and others like him. It is remarkable that Russian agrobiological science has always been progressive in this matter. Timoriziev, Michurin, Williams more than once rebuffed various kinds of Malthusian statements about limits in agriculture, about reserves of fertility, etc. Timoriziev pointed out that the development of chemistry, physics and psychology created the foundations of rational agriculture and made it possible to subjugate the nature of the plant and force him to provide the products needed by a person in larger quantities and of better quality. Soil fertility is used by humans in the process of agricultural labor. along with the growth of technical equipment in agriculture, as well as the investment of labor in soils, their fertility is also growing. The impossibility under capitalism of rational, comprehensive impact on natural conditions and soil cover is the reason for the progressive robbery of soils in the area of capitalism. The reason for the development of processes of relative and absolute loss of soil fertility. Only the socialist system creates all possibilities for a systematic, comprehensive transformation of nature, the elimination of negative properties in soils and the growth of their fertility. Vogt's pitiful assertions that every territory has a limited, narrow biological potential are lie. Long ago exposed by outstanding figures in our domestic agricultural science. It's also exposed by the actual harvests obtained under the conditions of the Soviet Union. These harvests were achieved in the Soviet Union at a time when the grandiose Stalinist program for transformation nature was just beginning to be implemented through the planting of state forest belts, the introduction grass crop rotations, widespread introduction of the Dokuchaev-Kotyushev-Williams complex in the country. But when Khrushchev came in power, that all was destroyed. Not limiting himself to the gloomy picture he painted of the death of civilization, Vogt goes further, denying the possibility of combining erosion, this scourge of American agriculture under capitalism. Vogt argues that soil erosion during cultivation is an inevitability phenomenon for agriculture in all countries and under all conditions. The absurdity and falsity of that thesis about widespread inevitability of erosion is refuted by the well-known process of artificially clogging of spawn soils and increase in the thickness of the soil layer on irrigated lands, and increase in the thickness of soil horizons in flooded meadows and alluvial soils, and the absence of washouts on plains with slopes less than 2 till 3, as well as in the culture of draining swamps, etc. Through the works of Dokuchaev and Williams, a system of anti-erosion measures was developed in the Soviet Union, which is systematically introduced into socialist agriculture in the general plan of transforming the nature of the Soviet Union. But of course, these measures are not feasible under the capitalist system. Vogt also claims that 630 millimeters of precipitation is not enough to produce a crop. The experience of obtaining high yields of grain and beets in the condition of Chernozem steppe zone in the Soviet Union, harvests obtained in the Volga region by the hero of socialist labor collective farmer Dolgova and others, characterized by annual precipitation of 350 and 450 millimeters, indicates that the amount of moisture is sufficient when farming is carried out on the basis of socialist principles and agriculture is armed with the latest technology, fertilizers, and has the ability to use the correct agriculture technology to ensure the accumulation and preservation of moisture in the soil. The point, of course, is not in soil erosion, not in dust storms or precipitation, but in dominance of business and private enterprise, the expulsion of which from agriculture is possible only with the destruction of the entire capitalist system. But no matter how hard Vogt tries, he cannot hide that the main reason for the theft and destruction of natural resources and soil fertility is capitalism. capitalism. Voxed misanthropic program fully corresponds to the needs of American imperialism and is adapted to facilitate the implementation of the plans of American warmongers seeking world domination, enslaving the peoples of the world and robbing them in the interest of American capitalists. The task of Soviet agrobiologists and soil scientists is to constantly expose the falsity and scientific inconsistency of modern Malthusianism based on new attempts to manipulate the facts, distort the achievements of progressive science, and attempts to hide from the public opinion of foreign countries the achievements of advanced science and socialist agriculture in the Soviet Union. In this struggle, an exceptional role was played by the session of the Old Union Academy of Agriculture Science, named after Lenin, who exposed and defeated the reactionary Mendelism and Morganism. Soviet agrobiologists and soil scientists must unequivocally oppose any manifestation of theories of eternity, immobility, and staticity of soil types and phenomena, since the theories inevitably lead to the pseudo-scientific conclusion about limits, limitations, natural possibilities, conservativeness of organic nature, biological potential, etc. The concepts of equilibrium of soils, their slowing down, fading, development, extreme leaching of soils are used at this stage by Vogt and similar obscurantist and inevitable end up in the ideological arsenal of modern imperialism. Working creatively with the entire Soviet people on the implementation of Stalin's plan for the transformation of nature and on the scientific generalization of advanced experience in obtaining high yields on collective and state farms, discovering and developing new ways of remarking soils and raising their fertility. Soviet scientists and contributing to the creation of an abundance of food production in the great work of building communism in our country. So this is summary for entire video. Of course, we thought of the 20th century some points and researchers have changed, but I'm trying to find a modern the resulting dynamics and the statistics in the issue of consequences with agrobiology and development. I came across a huge number of information garbage, and to say that this or that is reliable, I cannot. Under this capitalist condition, apply the law of sufficient reason practically impossible. But I ask our comrades from the United States, for example from California, on the issue of soil erosion. In short, the situation is worse than in the middle of the 20th century. And now companies like BlackRock and others come and buy a land for a reason. The lower fertile soil on the entire planet Earth is on the territory of the new owners and the masters. In fact, have a predatory plan for it. They seize these resources in this territory in impeccable condition. The most passionate young generation of Ukrainians is being destroyed by transnational corporations that stimulate people's head-to-head all over the earth for their own benefits and gradual profit. Well, Linforster the Rothschild tell it right.
Companies that are profiting while at the same time ruining people's lives or ruining the planet, those are not long-term keepers. Those are the companies that should fall off, down by the wayside. We should elevate. We sometimes at the Council for Inclusive Capitalism call it a race to the top. We should invest in and work for companies that are taking care of people and planet.
Many bad words can be said about modern capitalists and their monopolies. That's all the parasites came to start a massacre between white Americans, as they say. There is no plan for Dallas, but plan exists. No, I won't scold you, but Christine Lagarde quotes
Marx, who focused on the appropriation of the means of production and who predicted, obviously in The Capital, who predicted that capitalism in its excess carried the seeds of its own destruction, and did so because of the accumulation of capital in the hands of a few, essentially driven by the accumulation of profit, not especially concerned about consumption, and causing as a result social chaos and ultimately so many cyclical crises that capitalism would destroy itself. That's the description of Karl Marx.
So come in Ukraine, Africa, Russia, India, China. Also, you have been here for a long time. You are welcome. You are just waiting for us to go the path of violence, as stated in the last lines of the Communist Party manifesto, is the proletariat, which also gives birth to the offsprings, of course with for now, but now this revolution will be made by your hands, and yourself will invest funds and ensures the protection of your dialectic opposite. Otherwise, I repeat again, you will simply die with us. This is how we dialectically have already won. That's how we took upon ourselves the obligation of non-resistant to evil army. But not everything is so simple here. And now we are making a knight move in chess game. Or if we have a card game, we hit you with the joker. We break this whole game. Because we have only one spaceship called Earth. Thank you for watching.